Our South Africa today marking 28 years since the start of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Its aim was to uncover the truth about gross human rights violations during the apartheid period. Let's discuss this now with the Justice and Constitutional Development Truth and Reconciliation Commission Unit. The Deputy Director of that unit is Thapelo Mokushane, who joins us in studio this evening. Mr. Mokushane, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Let's begin with the purpose of the TRC. We've touched on what some of it was about, but here is the essence of what the administration at the time said this process would hopefully do, and it would be a restorative justice process whose purpose was to promote reconciliation and forgiveness between the perpetrator and the victim. How much of this would you say was achieved?
A lot. A lot has been achieved. Firstly, it's important also to highlight that the TRC came into being as a result of politically negotiated settlement. Today marks exactly 28 years since the first TRC hearing took place in East London in the Eastern Cape. And the first witness to appear before the TRC to testify is Mrs. Newzroom Afrika, who was testifying about the death of her husband in custody, Thapelo Mokushane. Today we are using this moment to pause and reflect and look forward and say, what have we achieved? A lot. One, the TRC managed to obtain more than or approximately 20,000 statements for victims of apartheid. Just around 19,000 were accorded victim status following their appearance before the TRC. With that, we as the government, it's important to highlight that after the TRC report was tabled in Parliament on the 15th of April 2003, I'm talking about volumes 1 to 5. After they were tabled by former President Thabo Mbeki in Parliament, that was when our unit was constituted to coordinate, monitor and report on an ongoing basis to Cabinet and Parliament on the implementation of TRC recommendations. Now, the TRC, how did it do its work? It did its work through 3 committees. One, Gross Human Rights Violations Committee, which was a platform for all those victims who suffered these atrocities between 1960 and 1994, to use that platform so that we hear their story. The second committee was Reparation and Rehabilitation, which was mandated to make recommendations to Parliament so that those recommendations are being implemented. That is the reason why we are here today, because I'm going to unpack how have we responded to the implementation of this recommendation. And the third committee, very important, is amnesty. This amnesty was a platform for all perpetrators who were applying for amnesty to come forward. One, to full disclosure, to provide full disclosure in respect of how they killed or tortured the victims of apartheid between 1960 and 1994. Apart from full disclosure, they had to demonstrate in their testimony that there was political motive for what they did. And lastly, very important, it was said that whatever they did should have occurred between 1960 and 1994. But now, I've been saying 1960 to 1994. There's a specific date here, 21st March 1960. 21st March 1960 marks the time, actually the mandate period of the TRC up to the 10th of May 1994. So the TRC was covering that period, what happened between 10th of March 1960, rather 21st March 1960 up to the 10th of May 1994. And why the 10th of May 1994? Because that was when the first black democratically elected president of this country, Nelson Mandela, was inaugurated.
Let's talk about reparations. How many of those families whose loved ones were mercilessly killed. Some of those may not even be able to point to where their loved ones are buried today, their remains. What does reparation look like for those families?
There are various forms of reparations that are in place for these families. One, we talk about individual reparations, payment of once-off individual reparations, which totals 30,000 rands per family. We are having less than 10 that could not be traced. Others have since passed on, but those who emerge, who happen to come and say, you haven't paid me the outstanding reparations, that money is still available, safe in the President's Fund. So it's still payable to all those who are accorded victims. So that is the first set of reparations. Right. The second set of reparations speaks to erection of appropriate symbols and monuments to exalt all those who contributed in the liberation struggle of this country. People need acknowledgement just for us to know that they contributed. You may be aware that throughout the country we have local municipalities that have erected appropriate municipalities in honor of those who contributed, who died, etc. That also constitute reparation. Yeah. We also have a Department of Arts and Culture at both provincial and national levels, respectively, doing that. We have a lot of these monuments around. Going to the third one, very important. It speaks to the provision of medical benefits and other forms of social assistance. And what are we saying on this one? We, as you may be aware that you find that some of the victims who were killed during that time of apartheid were breadwinners. They were fathers, mainly. Now, what happens when a breadwinner is killed in the family? You find that the children are left destitute. They have no one to lean on. Today, through what we call the TRC bursary scheme, as I'm talking to you now, since the promulgation of applicable regulations since 2015, we have assisted 8,767 learners to go through basic education. That is from grade R up to grade 12. In addition, we also have 1,896 who are going through higher education. That is also, you see, it's not just a question of paying them individually now, but we have provisions in place to ensure that they benefit. Lastly, we also talk about rehabilitation of communities that suffered intense acts of violence. Yeah. But another very significant form of reparation is symbolic. With this one, we are talking about a list of approximately 500 people who were reported missing to the TRC. And what does this say? It calls upon us to conduct the exhumations, followed by the handover and subsequent decent reburial by the families. Yeah. So all these remains are exhumed by the special unit located within the National Prosecuting Authority called the Missing Persons Task Team. To date, we have exhumed and handed over and reburied 180.
Lots of information to digest there, and I'm unable, for example, to probe where or how the figure of 30,000 was arrived at for individual reparations. We'll probably tackle that some other day, because there is one critical element we've got to get through, and that is the 300 cases. These are the 300 apartheid crimes that were referred by the Commission to the NPA for prosecution. Of these 300 cases, how many would you say have been successfully prosecuted?
The work of prosecuting TRC-related cases, firstly, falls under the jurisdiction of the National Prosecuting Authority. But I will just share public information with you. I'm not in a fit position to go into the nitty-gritties, but we do have information. As of January this year, 15 prosecutors have been supported by SAPS investigators. That team has been assembled in order to deal with some of the prosecutable cases emanating from the TRC process. By the way, why these prosecutions are happening? They happen because, one, those who were denied amnesty, according to the TRC recommendation, have to be prosecuted. And those who did not come forward to apply for amnesty are also liable for prosecution. Now, a total of 137 cases have been registered for investigation, and 10 matters currently are on the roll for prosecution. Not so long ago, let me refer to this case. We went to Western Cape in Worcester last year, just recently, working together with the Hawks, together with, Hawks supported by other members of this team that are prosecuting TRC-related cases. We went there to investigate. They went there firstly to investigate the case of Bellington Mampe, who was a PAC stalwart who died in custody in Worcester Prison, today called Worcester Correctional Facility. He died there. He was buried elsewhere around Worcester. His remains could not be found. But there was a suspicion in respect of how he died. So the team started doing its work by investigating, only to discover at a later stage, through their work, that the records that led to his death could not be found. It's one of the cases. So we also came in. I represent the TRC unit located within the Department of Justice, tasked to coordinate, monitor, and report on the implementation of TRC recommendation. Now, working together as these various teams, since the remains of Bellington Mampe could not be found, had they been found, investigations are going to continue so that prosecutions takes place. But what we did, because the remains could not be found, we enabled the family to perform appropriate spiritual repatriation from the center, the facility, correctional center where he died, so that he could be repatriated and symbolically buried in his hometown, paternal hometown in the Eastern Cape, just outside there, but Kofimvaba.
Let's leave it there. Lots and lots to ponder over during this period, and I'm sure we'll have many of these discussions because there are questions that continue to linger, including the former president just this year pushing back against the claims that the administration, the Mbeki administration, may have interfered. In fact, there doesn't seem to be any doubt now, given the Supreme Court of Appeal, which says on record that his government may have interfered with the prosecution of these cases. But we're going to have to leave it there. Time is against us. Thank you very much for your time. Thapelo Mokushane, a Deputy Director in the Constitutional Development, Truth and Reconciliation Commission Unit. Thanks indeed again.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right.